Do you remember Kermit the Frog and his song, "It's Not Easy Being Green"? Kermit was lamenting the fact that when you're green, you get overlooked because you blend in with so many other things. Did you know that when you're smart, particularly when you're intellectually brilliant or gifted, you can also blend in a way that causes misunderstanding and mislabeling of challenges? This is LD Expert Live. Today, we're going to explore giftedness and the 2E or twice exceptional population. The perception is that these kids are smart and therefore they'll be okay. But in reality, gifted kids are so unique that they have some very special needs. Welcome to LD Expert Live, your place for answers and solutions for learning differences, dyslexia, and attention challenges. I'm your host, Jill Stowell, founder of Stowell Learning Centers and author of At Wit's End, A Parent's Guide to Ending the Struggle, Tears, and Turmoil of Learning Disabilities. To get a free copy, go to parentsatwitsend.com. Let's say hello to Lauren, and our Stowell Learning Center Director of Clinical Growth and Operations and our moderator for today.
Hello.
Good morning, Lauren.
Good morning. Hello to everyone watching us live. Let us know that you're here and where you're checking in from. We love to see all the places where people are viewing from. Parents, we have a resource for you if you're looking for more connection outside the show. We have a private Facebook group called Mom Squad. You can find it on our Facebook page or by searching Facebook groups. Search the term SLC Mom Squad and you can request to join. You just need to fill out a couple of questions. It's a great place to share resources. Sometimes I'll reference some downloads that I've posted in Mom Squad that you can get. I posted a lot of different files and resources for parents. So come join us. We love to grow the group and support each other. And I am really excited about today's show. One of the things, I have a lot of things that I love about my job, but one of the things that I've really has given me joy throughout the years is working with this gifted population or this twice exceptional population. These are amazing kids and they see the world differently. And it's just so exciting to see, them blossom when they work with us, that, that hindrance of a learning challenge isn't getting in their way and they can show all that talent and ability, and the world can see just really how intelligent they are. So really excited about our guest and what she has to share today. If you have questions about twice exceptional kiddos, your kiddos, go ahead and post them in the chat. And we have some people checking in. We have Karen from Sacramento, welcome. We have Andrea from Vegas, welcome. And Dee checking in from New Mexico. And let's see, Jesse from Illinois. So keep posting, start posting your questions and comments, and we'll check back in a little bit.
Great. Thanks, Lauren. If you're just joining us, this is LD Expert Live. I'm your host, Jill Stowell. Our guest today is Betsy Jones. Betsy has been an educator, researcher, and administrator of educational programs for over 38 years. She holds a master's degree in special education from USC and has completed doctoral work in the field of educational policy and learning theory. She served as the associate director of the Johns Hopkins Center for Talented Youth and the director of the Western region for 10 years prior to founding the Institute for Educational Advancement in 1998. As president of IEA, Betsy led in the creation and implementation of the award-winning UNASA Summer Camp for Gifted Children and the Carolyn D. Bradley Scholarship. Welcome, Betsy.
Hi, good morning.
It's so great to have you.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
You clearly have a real heart for gifted youth. I would love to hear the story behind that. What led you to this population?
Well, back in the day, millions of years ago when I was in school, I had a real passion for children with learning differences. So I majored in special education and really felt that was my pathway to doing things that brought me joy and passion. My very first classroom of special needs kids, it was a first through sixth grade self-contained classroom, was on a residential campus. And the students often took medication before they came down to class. And one day, this student who usually slept through class forgot his meds. And he was brilliant. We had the best day. He learned and knew more things than I ever knew. And it was just remarkable. And I started to think, we're missing out on a lot of young people. He can't be the only one. We ended up changing his medication and working with him. So he turned out with some support systems that were fabulous for a while. But it really got me thinking that there is a population of special needs kids that I didn't know anything about. Mm-hmm. And probably, as it turned out, I was probably one of those kids growing up as well, being bright and having some learning disabilities as well. So it really caught my eye and attention. So I started doing some more research on that, did work in psychometrics and testing, and then ended up at Johns Hopkins working with gifted children. And working with gifted children was fabulous, but I still felt that we weren't doing something about all aspects of self. So gifted kids then were all about the intellect. How do we serve their minds, which is the most important thing for a gifted child, is feeding that intellect. But there's so much more to a gifted child than just their mind. And that's all aspects of self.
Right. And so often, as I said earlier, people think, oh, well, they're just so bright, they'll be fine. They'll be able to do anything. And don't realize that there could be some things, some stumbling blocks for them also. So tell us a little bit about IEA, the Institute for Educational Advancement, which you founded in 1998.
So kind of going off that, beginning to realize that we did a great job at CTY with working with a child in the summertime with their intellect. And they were so happy meeting with other like-minded peers and having that time together of this one content area. But then they went home and they had the entire rest of the year. And gifted children are gifted 24/7. Ask any parent who has a gifted child. They are going, asking questions, moving 24/7. So we started an organization to really help deal with the needs of gifted children 24/7. And that means working with children in their mind, body, spirit, social, emotional needs, as well as supporting teachers and parents, because all of that comes together to serve the whole child in all aspects of what they do. And so we founded the organization. I hired Jim Davis, who was at the time the superintendent of Lackawanna School District, and kind of hired him away from that to start this adventure. And here we are, quite some time later, and with many programs under our belt, and have serving more than 10,000 children.
Wow. What a gift to that population and their families. So I know there are many definitions of gifted, and I want to put up the definition that IEA works with because I think it's really helpful in understanding these students. And then I'd just like for you to unpack it a little bit for us.
Well, we know that gifted children learn at a faster pace, and they think in creative, innovative ways. And they have this deep, deep desire for complex learning when they're interested. And when we founded the organization, we realized there were many, many different definitions of gifted, and we had to find one that really fit our mission of serving the whole child. So we did some investigation, and we found this definition by the Columbus Group. And interestingly enough, as time went on, many members of the Columbus Group became advisors and supporters and great friends of ours over the years. So clearly there's a synergy in this connection and this definition. Giftedness is asynchronous development in which advanced cognitive ability and a heightened intensity combine to create inner experiences and awareness that are qualitatively different than the norm. This asynchronicity increases with higher intellectual capacity. The uniqueness of the gifted renders them particularly vulnerable and requires modification in parenting, teaching, and counseling in order for them to develop optimally. So this definition really highlights all the things that we do at the organization. And it becomes something that we are able to share with parents, and they can see pretty quickly the differences in their children, that they're different from the norm, significantly different from the norm. And part of that comes with this asynchronous development. And that kind of means that they're growing at different paces. So you might have a child that is out of step with themselves or with their peers. Their vocabulary is different than somebody else, their same age group. So that's very different. They may in themselves be able to do some amazing math problems in their head, but not be able to write perfectly well in the classroom. So their development is just at different rates. And that asynchronicity causes discomfort, but this great intensity that allows the complexity of mind and spirit to grow. One of the Linda Silverman, who's very famous in the field and one of our leaders and somebody who I admire immensely, talks about asynchronicity as being a phenomenon that's really common in giftedness, and that it means that a child may have a larger variances in their abilities, such as advanced intellectual ability, a very quick mind, but slower motor skills, and that their ability in other things may be lagging in some aspects. But this passion for learning and mastery that's so characteristic of gifted is really found in this intensity, in this emotional intensity, which drives their desire to learn. We know that gifted children also think differently than other children. But not only think differently, they feel different. And that's that asynchronicity that causes them to just feel life in a little bit different way. They see things in different ways than other young people or adults do. And sometimes that's hard to understand. And sometimes it's a little intimidating. But this different way of experiencing the world is what causes them to be these amazing, wonderful young people that grow into amazing, wonderful adults. But an example of a story that I have of this difference in a child is this young person. We found her in 6th grade, and we're asking her questions as to why she wasn't doing very well in school, because clearly her test scores were amazing. And she told us this story. She was from South Central LA, grew up with her grandmother in a very challenging neighborhood, and her grandmother read to her every day. And she was so excited about going to kindergarten. She couldn't wait to go to kindergarten. She heard that they had books there and that you could learn and you had other kids to learn with, and it was safe. She was so excited. Her grandmother made her a new dress. She started kindergarten. Things were great. They made macaroni necklaces the first week or two. And then by week 3, she was done with the macaroni necklaces. And one day the teacher had them all sitting on the carpet reading a story, and she asked a question about the 2 individuals in the book. And she raised her hand saying, I know the answer. And the teacher never called on her because she always had the right answer. But she finally did. And the teacher said, so what happened? And she said, well, these 2 characters commingled their thoughts. Teacher said, okay, these 2 characters merged their ideas. And the teacher said, in the hall. So this young person had this great intellectual desire, but couldn't figure out how to manage the classroom with kindergartners that didn't understand her vocabulary. So she went in the hall and decided she was done learning. And she spent her kindergarten and 1st grade years counting the dots in the ceiling tiles in this school. That's a child that needed our help early on. That's a child with asynchronous development, learning different ways, and had this great intensity and passion for learning. This teacher didn't think she was doing anything wrong. She just didn't know. And that's where it comes in, that our parenting and teaching and counseling has to be different for these young people to really understand that need they have, that desire to learn, that intensity that needs to be fed in order for them to develop the rest of their selves.
Wow, that story just breaks my heart. But it's a great example. Wow, that was just a great picture of how you can have a child that is so bright and so capable and be so misunderstood. And I love that definition of asynchrony. I think it really does help give us a picture. And I just want to verify something with you. So in most children, development of intellectual, social, emotional, physical skills basically move forward together in sync with their chronological age. But with gifted children, each of these areas and the components within those areas kind of is on its own trajectory. So you get this very uneven development. Is that
That's
right?
exactly right, because their minds are developing so quickly that the rest of them doesn't necessarily develop the same rate. So emotionally, a child could be much farther behind than another child would be. So it could very well be something that we talk to parents about, of talking to the child. Are you your 30-year-old self right now, or are you your 4-year-old self right now? Wow. And it's very hard to distinguish, because you could be having this very in-depth conversation with these complex ideas, and then a second later there's a temper tantrum because they really are only 7 and they're being 7, or because they have lagged in their emotional development, they are younger than that. So this inability to feel good in their skin because their minds are moving so quickly, the rest of their whole selves don't catch up quite as quickly.
Right. And then everyone else looking on is really perplexed as well. You know, I remember a friend's little boy who was very tall for his age. He was only 2, but he looked like he was 4. So other people expected him to act like he was 4. And when he acted like he was 2, people would look at his parents like, your kid's too big to be acting like that. Well, I mean, clearly the same kind of misunderstanding then happens for these gifted kids. So you've given us some ideas. What are some of the other kinds of behaviors that you might see at home or in the classroom as a result of this asynchronous development of gifted kids?
We talked a little bit about the mind moving so quickly, and this the small motor skills not moving quite as quickly. And that's pretty common with this population, that they have so many thoughts in their mind, they just can't get them down quick enough. Or physically, they just really don't have that fine motor skill. Another thing that happens is these kids are very intense. And so they take things very seriously and have very great sensitivities. So it could very well be that they feel hurt by a friend that a parent or a teacher doesn't think was a big deal. They just went to play with somebody else. But that deep hurt or feeling of loss is so very deep and real that child, again, looks a little bit different from the norm. And that's understanding that their feelings are real. It also could very well be that a child has different mannerisms of learning or different ways of learning. So for example, we hear often that students already know the answers to a question, but the teacher wants them to show their work. Well, they already know how to do it. They don't know how they know how to do it, but they know how to do it. Or being able to sight read and not be able to know phonics. But they don't need to know phonics because they can read, so they don't understand why they're being asked to do that. So this asynchronicity or doing things at different levels or speeds than other children causes them to be very different from the norm. It
really is easy to see how these kids can be misunderstood and why it's so important to educate educators and parents about that. You know, I think people tend to see the strengths and think that automatically means that every other area will be as strong. we see this all the time at the learning centers. We may have a student who is absolutely brilliant at math, but struggles with reading. But because he's so good at math, teachers and sometimes even parents may think that the problem is that he's just not interested or he's not motivated to read.
That happens all the time. And in addition, though, you have a child who is very capable in math, but stops performing because the work they're being given is so below their level of learning, they've lost that challenge, that desire, that intensity to want to know more. So then they really are not performing to their level. And this is where we sometimes get into, is your child really gifted because he's not performing in school that way? Or the vocabulary is so advanced that the other kids don't understand, and the teacher doesn't want to be told that they're wrong in how they pronounce a word or the definition of a word. So it can be very challenging to explain to a child that there's respect for a teacher, and then there's a way to correct offline if you feel you need to have that direct conversation.
Yeah, that's, I remember when I was teaching in a classroom, I taught gifted kids, and I had one of those amazing kids who always loved to, he loved to have adult conversations over the top of the heads of the other kids in the class with me. And he was so clever, but it was so disruptive to teaching a whole class. So, we know from our experience at the learning centers that there are gifted children and teens who also have specific learning disabilities. Can you talk a little bit more? I mean, we've kind of talked about this, I know, but about that 2E or twice exceptional population.
So take that asynchronicity and just quadruple it for a child who's gifted and sometimes highly gifted, and also has a disability such as ADHD, dyslexia, or autism. And many of these kids have sensory processing issues as well. And add that together, that growth is quadrupled with the differences of who they are. And what makes it very hard for these kids is they know enough, they're smart enough to know they should be doing better. And they don't understand why they can't do what their mind thinks they can do. Mm-hmm. And we spend so much time thinking about the remediation of an issue that a child might have, that we forget that they need to be fed intellectually to really make that happen. So you could have a child, for example, who is a fourth grader reading at a ninth grade level, and the same child may have fine motor skills of a first grader, but can write a book report as a third grader, and can do calculus at a 10th grade level, but still is doing math facts at a second grade level because of processing issues. So all in this one little person, they have all of these different things going on that causes that discomfort, and that can lead to depression, lack of self-confidence, fear of trying something new because you're going to fail. Many gifted kids are very perfectionistic and they don't want to fail. So then why even try something if you're not going to do it right? So it becomes very challenging to deal with this kind of a young person. It's also very challenging to identify this kind of young person because one masks the other. If a child is performing at grade level, which is what our teachers are taught to do, is to teach at grade level, and your child is doing well, as a parent, when you go and say, my child should be doing 2 grade levels above, the teacher is looking at you like, you should be happy your child is at grade level. What? This is great. Your child is doing great. Not understanding that the child is not performing to their ability. And why is that? And asking those questions.
Right.
So that becomes challenging as well.
Yeah, sometimes kids can really be struggling so much, and yet they just know enough that it's just not going to qualify them on a test, on the specific test, because they they can compensate well enough, they know enough, and yet they do really have the special needs. And sometimes the other thing is that because their needs are so unique, that even if they do qualify, say, as having a learning disability, they're doing well enough that a lot of times people don't know what to do with them.
Exactly. They don't qualify for either program. They cancel each other out.
Mm-hmm.
So the masking of being gifted is there, but then the masking of the difficulty is also masked. And so it's very challenging. And most schools simply do not have the ability or not set up to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And while we know that approximately 5% of the population probably are 2E students, there are probably so many more young people or adults that are 2E that have just simply never been identified, but have been able to compensate.
Right.
And many gifted kids on their own figure out how to compensate over the years, but they really struggle in those younger years when there is no ability or way to compensate. Mm-hmm. And that's when parents really are called upon to help that child with their executive functioning, or a parent or a teacher might need to spend more time on making sure that the child has their homework written out. And that's fine. That's good to give them that support to get them through, as long as you really focus on their strengths and give them that ability to delve into what is interesting and their passion, because that's what brings them joy. And bottom line, that's the importance. Right. What brings you joy.
So let's talk a little bit about the social ramifications of giftedness.
So this is something that's very complicated in many ways as well. Many of the parents that come in talk to me about my child. I watch them outside and they don't have anyone to play on the playground. I'm very, very concerned about they have no friends. And then I talk to the child and the child's like, yeah, my mom's upset about that. I kind of like reading by myself at lunch. It gives me a break. So sometimes the kids are really fine in that regard. But in other cases, it's just a situation of not being understood. And think about it. If you are, again, a young child in kindergarten or first grade, and your vocabulary is so different than everybody else, the games that you create because of your imagination are so complicated, the other kids just kind of walk away and are bored from listening to you or confused. And it's not the same thing. So you don't learn those social cues that you've had the benefit, that we all had the benefit of learning in kindergarten and first grade from your peers, because you don't have peers to learn from. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that really helps this with our gifted population is by matching them with like-minded peers. And then they do begin to learn those social skills that they can only learn from somebody who's very similar to them, of how to behave and what is socially appropriate in different ways. Mm-hmm. In addition, with the intensities that these kids have, that sometimes can almost be seen as being on the spectrum, they don't think about that kind of a situation of how they could be interpreted differently. Or as you said, talking over a teacher could be seen as rude, whereas the child is just excited to share. So those social issues are very complex. And finding peers that really can relate to you is difficult. Then you have people that say to you, well, you're not performing in school because the child is bored, but people call the child lazy, or you really aren't gifted, or you're not doing this. So that causes some depression and that anxiety, or not sleeping well because of all of these different things that are going on. So that can't help but impact a social emotional issue in a young person.
Right. And sometimes I think people associate, they think, oh, well, they're gifted, they should be a very high achiever. And so sometimes there's that misunderstanding as well. And then I was thinking about, these children that they are, a child who's doing calculus and they're 9 years old. Well, the only way for them to really get to learn that, in school is to be put in advanced classes. But then they are so immature that they're really going to stand out there as well. So it's challenging, really.
Well, it is. And really, all the research states over and over again that acceleration really is the most appropriate way to treat a gifted child, to make sure they're learning at that level that they are able to be at, which really is an acceleration. It's teaching them where they are. It may be accelerated with the child next door, but to them, it's right where they are. But then you have to deal with all of the other things that come with that. And the teacher has to be trained to be able to deal with that and all of those different aspects of what happens that's challenging. And I think one of the biggest risks we have with these kids is that they do become risk averse and afraid to do things because things come so easily. They're used to everything being right. And they aren't being taught how to learn because things come easy. And when they fail the first time because something was hard, that's tough. They don't have the optimal match of learning at a great, appropriate level for them to challenge them. So they have a little bit of that gentle tension of, is this right? Is that not right? Or that aha moment of, yay, look what I did. I finally got it right. We need those aha moments in life.
We do. We do. So, you know, one of the things that is so challenging in terms of helping gifted and 2E kids is that there's just no recipe. There's no one size fits all because the individual traits and the rates of development for one gifted child may be extremely different from those of another. So we're going to dig into some ways to support these kids in just a bit. This is LD Expert Live. I'm Jill Stowell, founder of Stowell Learning Centers, and my guest is Betsy Jones, founder and president of IEA, the Institute for Educational Advancement. We're going to check in with Lauren and our viewers, and then we'll talk about some of the ways to support and some resources for exceptional and twice exceptional children and their parents.
Hello. Yes, this is a topic that is definitely resonating with a lot of our viewers today. We have Angela checking in, important topic. Thank you so much. Jesse was resonating when Jill was talking about having a kiddo that would have like these adult conversations and appreciated, you know, more mature vocabulary. She was saying her girl does that as well. And then Andrea saying when we talked about kiddos being like, they compensate so well, or sometimes they don't test to their abilities, or sometimes they test beyond their abilities, so they're hard to identify. Andrea really resonating with that. Yes, spot on. It's interesting because at the Learning Center, we definitely work with this population. I mean, I just think that giftedness and sometimes having learning challenges goes hand in hand. And so a lot of times we'll get kids before they're identified as gifted. And as we start to work with them, they're able to blossom and really show that intelligence. It reminds me, we had a student named Robbie, and he came to us when he was 11, and he was kind of mislabeled, absolutely mislabeled. He was in remedial math. He was in all of the low classes to a point where his parents were so frustrated, they just pulled him out and homeschooled him because he was constantly put into these special education programs that were below his ability. Because he couldn't do math. I mean, his parents came to us and said, you know, he can't add two numbers. He could not add 3 + 4 without using his fingers. But as we started working with him and you started to see these connections be made, his self-esteem grew. And then he kind of always did this. It was just like, he just started to blossom, but he would come in with these books on quantum physics that were like this thick, and he'd be right in the middle of it. And he'd be, oh, let me tell you what I read. And to me, I was like, I don't know any of what you're talking about, but it sounds great. And his parents started to take him to, here in LA, we have the Griffith Observatory. Before COVID, used to have like lectures on astrophysics. And he would go and attend those and sit in the front row and just be totally enthralled. And in Pasadena, Betsy, your area, the JPL Jet Propulsion Lab, they also have some lectures and things like that. And he attended events there. And so it was just amazing to see that, you know, kind of discrepancy between what he could be tested to do, or what he was able to, how he was able to perform in traditional schooling. And truly, you know, when he left us, his abilities were just so much greater. He was actually able to show all of this brilliance that he kind of had. I mean, it was sad, bottled up for so long. And that's, you know, I could tell you dozens and dozens of stories like that, but he's the one that comes to mind just because those thick physics books that he would come into the center with, and he's just so brilliant. So we definitely understand this population, and they do need to be nurtured. And that's kind of that, special place we have in our hearts of like, it's just so sad if these kids do get mislabeled and the world is not able to see their brilliance for what it is. So we have some parents, kind of two ends of the spectrum. We have Andrea is a parent of a little guy, of a 4-year-old. She said, "This is why I didn't agree with my son's developmental pediatrician. We diagnosed him with severe ADHD at the age of 4. I wanted to put him on medication. Putting a label on my son just to medicate him, for me, would just stop us from trying to understand his struggles and try to help with them." And she doesn't want that for him. Her son is, like you said, very intense, full of energy, but I believe in guiding and educating him instead of trying to fix it with medication. She says he's definitely different from the norm, but once we get him, he gets things quickly. He's very smart, but doesn't work well when he feels like he's being forced to do things. Does that sound typical to this population?
While there are some children that are gifted with attention deficit disorders and things to that effect, many children are misdiagnosed. And that happens because of their intensities. And we'll talk a little bit more about overexcitabilities in a little bit, but many of these kids just talk with their hands all the time, are very active and march their own drummer and don't want to be told what to do. And it's very typical of a highly gifted child to behave this way, especially when they're younger and they can't self-regulate with that same emotional ability. They can sit there and read a textbook or an advanced book, as you said, a thick book, and still repeat everything you said in the room next door when you come back in the room. So they're able to multitask. Or they become so intense in one thing, which is why they're not actually have an attention deficit. They can focus on one thing, like trains, for 5 hours and be very content with learning everything about a train, and not want to leave that particular task. So I definitely appreciate that, especially a young child that really looking at all your options. And we often see, as you said, Lauren, feeding that intellect of a child gives them that strength to overcome some of the things of self-regulation or dealing with some other issues. And that really has to be the first line of defense, if you will. That's how they're fueled, is through their intellect and being taught.
Oh, so great. Now we have the opposite end of the spectrum with some high school seniors. We have Robin checking in. I know Robin, hello, welcome. What resources do you have for a kid graduating from high school this year? He's applied to college, but he wants to take a gap year. He's twice exceptional and intelligent, but his maturity hasn't developed.
Actually, this is the year to do it. We have so many of our clients and participants and constituents that are taking a year off this year. And then we have some students that are highly gifted that this would have been their freshman year in college, but they're doing it at home because of COVID. And it was the perfect choice for them to really have that ability to work from home virtually, have some of that still stability that you need with that emotional development to get through. But then next year is really excited and ready to go on to college. And many gifted young people are younger because they have been accelerated. And so taking that gap year, as long as there's purposeful time being spent, is really a great idea. And making sure they're exploring interests and things to help them develop that maturity as well, and that ability to be independent.
Okay, and then we have, I hope we're pronouncing this, so Jalpa. We have a twice exceptional gifted with autism high school senior who has excelled up to his junior year. He began struggling after a head injury. Even though he is physically recovering, he has started struggling in school, not being able to prioritize and barely keeping up in classes. He doesn't seem bored, rather overwhelmed, even though much of these the subject matter should not be hard for him. What guidance can you give us?
It sounds to me, and then Jill, you might want to chime in here. It sounds to me like there is so much this child is overwhelmed with what they've gone through, that really breaking this down into small chunks, that while what you think he could have done before may be more challenging, maybe just going to school is challenging now, and other things are taking place of what that intellectual ability would be, that are still causing using the mind differently. So breaking things down into small chunks that could develop success might build up his ability to do more. And Jill, you might want to.
No, I think that makes sense. I mean, I know when we work with students with concussion, you know, it's a real insult to the brain, and it can last for a long time. The effects of it, the disorganization, or you know, the brain fog, or and inconsistencies. So I think we just have to be very observant, you know, and of what the child needs, and be willing to flex with expectations and how they performed before, and just help them, as you said, in small little chunks, so that they can begin to feel the success, which will then fuel them to move forward, and, you know, just one bite at a time.
Absolutely. We have another parent, Andrea, checking in. We live in Southern California. My son is twice exceptional, and I'm continuously advocating for him at his school. He attends a Catholic school, but I feel they're not interested in helping or accepting him. He does not fit their behavior box. I feel defeated. He also has challenges with phonics. Any suggestions for the type of specialist to help him with phonics that is not beneath his level? Any suggestions on schools that are affordable to help a twice exceptional child?
That there's a lot there. You're not alone in this, that schools really aren't equipped to deal with 2E kids, especially a traditional school environment. But I think wanting to supplement outside the school environment is a really good option for you. Trying to make sure that your child feels seen and heard is really important, especially when they're boxed in and feel isolated and not seen and heard for who they are, is really of value. And that advocacy that you're doing may seem like no one's hearing you, but you got to keep doing it. As far as phonics at his level, maybe he's a sight learner and doesn't need the phonics, or it's working with you and your child. Sometimes just reading together with your finger, even though he's older, keeping his eye tracking and learning those particular things. And it could be a processing issue, just not being able to hear the differences in the vowel sounds or certain consonants that cause phonics to be a problem for a child. And so that would be doing some sensory work with a specialist in that regard.
Right. And those are the kinds of things, I mean, when we're talking about those underlying skills, the auditory processing pieces or visual processing, those are the kinds of things that, as we work with students, we're looking at those underlying skills. What is getting in the way of the student being able to perform at their potential, or as we would expect? There's, you know, if they're smart and they're struggling, then there's something that's getting in the way that we can, once identified, it can be developed. But I kind of have to agree with Betsy there. I mean, sometimes with this population, I mean, they may be placed in a situation where they're expected to do very specific, detailed things when they already actually have this. They have the overall skill, and so I'm sure that adds to the challenge. Because it does feel like the child is pretty boxed in there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so we have some parents that are kind of struggling with this, that this idea that, like, you know, their child, yes, has some needs at the remedial level, or needs, you know, some skills remediated, but they don't kind of belong in this box. So Angela's saying, in my experience, special education in school wants to be remedial. How long do we read "The Cow is Brown" when we can listen to, understand, discuss literature above grade level. Different instructional needs are very different for schools to address. And piggybacking off of that, Jennifer chimes in, my 10-year-old took Algebra 1 with high schoolers this spring online and excelled, but I can't ask for him to jump ahead in school because of all his other challenges not being addressed or accommodated. So again, we see parents kind of saying, my kid doesn't fit because the school does kind of do a one size fits all, either they're remedial or they're gifted, but we can't do both at the same time and be that specialized. So definitely some frustration there. We do have, we have Ronki check-in. We missed you from Michigan. Hello. And she says, well done. And we have Shirley checking in, and she has some questions specifically about terms. Does 2E gifted mean high IQ, but with other issues like learning disabilities? So just some clarification.
I would say yes, that is a good way to define it.
Okay. And then a follow-up question from Shirley. Can the IQ be average, but still classify as gifted? Can a child still be classified as gifted?
It really depends. Again, so many different definitions of gifted, and it depends on your school district and your school as to how you're defining that. But really going back to the individual child and how they learn, they may be learning very quickly for a while and then plateau in a certain level and then learn very quickly in a different skill. So they'd be very quick in math for a while and then reading for a while. So just keeping on top of what that child is doing and maybe not worrying so much about the actual score, but about the interest and passion of the child to help them keep moving forward, which is really important. That, again, gentle tension of what's happening in their school and education.
Absolutely. And then follow-up question from Shirley, who can determine if a child is gifted? Is it diagnosed by a neuropsychologist?
Many different ways. Again, your school can do it depending on how they do it, but usually it can be a behavioral, looking at a checklist to determine if, do they check all these boxes? Are they performing above the norm of other children in that grade level or age group? And then professionally being assessed with a IQ test and other assessments as well. Okay.
And then just some follow-up, Ronke, mislabeling is a problem. It impacts the child so negatively. And I believe that is when the problem really does start. It makes them feel so insecure, like they cannot excel in anything. And we definitely see that, some defeated kiddos coming to us. And Andrea relating, thank you for your answer and kind of relating. She said, yes, that's my son. He can pay attention on what he likes to what he likes for hours. He can tell you everything about ways to produce energy, but he doesn't know how to play tag. So we can really say he has ADHD. So can we really say he has ADHD when he has the ability to pay attention with some things that interest him?
So again, that's where I would say I'd hold off a little bit and let the other aspects of self mature and work on that a little bit by finding like-minded peers that he can do other activities with. And maybe it's not tag.
And Jennifer is asking, how do you get your 9-year-old child to help, the help that they need at school when they mask their symptoms at school? Oh, it's moving. And then they have meltdowns at home. Oh, we hear about this a lot. He excels in reading, but has difficulty with any activity that requires writing and executive function skills. School says he doesn't need help because he's meeting grade level expectations.
This is the kind of classical way we started. His abilities are masking each other. Yeah. And it does sound like this child does need additional support. And that frustration is being built up so much that when they come home, it's their safe place, their safe zone. One of the things we talk about with a child when they walk in here is, where is your safe place? Where do you go to let go that energy that you have pent up because you're not being seen or heard? And you have to find that safe place and be allowed to have that emotion. Parents doing a temperature read of how are you feeling right now? And maybe you need to take a run around the block, or we talk about nature being so valuable to these kids. If you have the ability to go outside for a little bit, sit by a tree, hug the tree, talk to the tree, sit in the grass. Those are some things to help relieve some of that pent up tension when you don't feel seen or heard, and this child doesn't seem like it's being seen or heard.
Right, absolutely. Annie is from Pasadena area. Her 7-year-old prefers to do all his math in his head, adding and subtracting 3-digit numbers in his head, but he doesn't understand how to show his work. He doesn't understand that, which is, what Common Core wants him to do. And she's saying teachers require showing work, but don't know how to bridge this gap with this population. We do hear about that a lot, that just what they're asking, the traditional way of asking kids to show what they know isn't how this population thinks. It's not always a linear process. So we definitely resonate. And then Robin's asking for, are there any local schools for twice exceptional kids? I encourage all to put their kids there. These kids don't fit into the box, and it just beats these kids down to try to be, or to exist in an environment that doesn't serve them. Any schools that you know of?
There's one school in the area that's called Bridges, and they do a very good job with 2E young people. And that's an option. It is an independent school. It's a private school, but they do understand this particular population. And more educators are learning about this. This is now becoming something that people definitely talk about, and their conferences about. So I do have hope that schools and teachers will have better tools to deal with this. Again, I'm learning that the strengths are really important, and that when you feed the strengths, the weaknesses will come along, that they just do.
Absolutely. So I want to make sure that we're going to talk about resources in a little bit, and some strategies. I want to make sure we get to that. Parents, thank you so much for participating. We'll check back in one more time. So keep posting your questions and comments.
Great. Thank you, Lauren. This is LD Expert Live. I'm your host, Jill Stowell, talking with Betsy Jones about the needs of gifted and twice exceptional children and how to support them. And I just had a thought kind of listening through all of the questions and comments. I think that parents, even though when you go to the school, it may feel intimidating, and in those IEP meetings where you have so many people there, but I think that those of us who understand these kids, at least to some degree, we have to be educating the educators, because they really don't understand why these kids are behaving the way they are, and don't understand how you can come in and say, my child really needs help. He's working so hard at school and he melts down at home. They don't see that because he's performing okay. He's average, but this child is way, way more than average. And it's a lot of stress on them to try to perform when there are things getting in their way. And I just think constantly we have to be educating anyone who is working with our kids, including families, educating our families and our friends about our kids so that they appreciate and, interact well with them. Betsy, you mentioned earlier that gifted kids often seem quite intense and anxious. And I just wanted us to talk a little bit more about that, because I think, again, that's a place where they can be misunderstood as behavior problems, ADHD, and defiant. And so I just, would like to dig into that just a little bit more.
So many gifted children have characteristics that really are defined with their intensities. And there's something that in the field we use as a guide, and for others as well, but they seem to fit with gifted children. That's called overexcitabilities. And this is a theory developed by Dabrowski, and I encourage you to look into that more deeply. But just to kind of go quickly over some of those intensities that these children have, it's often a good thing to do with your child, because what you might see in your child, you may also see in yourself. One of them is the psychomotor issue of rapid talk, physical activity, pacing when you're learning. We have kids that read and pace. It's a good way to make that mind-body connection, is have them read and pace at the same time. And one of the ways to help them with that is teaching relaxation techniques. We do a lot of this at our Camp UNASA and other programs of helping kids meditate and calm their mind, and using visual guidance to help really deal with some of that over excitability and intensity in the psychomotor arena. And also really learning, and this is one of the things I would teach parents too, that timeout is a choice. Parents can take a timeout from your children. That's often a very good thing to do. And that kids will then model themselves of when they need to take a timeout to help them from that kind of intensity. The other thing that makes these children different from the norm of many children is their sensual intensity. And this is where they have these great experiences that are over what other young people might have. Their awareness of things that like the sunset or music, but they're also very sensitive to touch and feel, and maybe the tags in the back of their shirt bother them, or their socks bother them, or they need cotton clothing. They sometimes might say that they hear the flowers sing, or they can see colors or feel colors in different ways. And this over sensual need is often causing them to need to have headphones in the classroom, for example, because their senses are so intense, or lights need to be dimmed because the light bothers them. So looking at different ways in that regard is really important. The imagination, we know these kids have great imaginations, but that also means that sometimes they have difficulty expressing difference between what is real and what isn't real. So helping them understand that is a big support, and use their imagination to solve problems. And that's how we're going to get out of many of the problems of our world right now, is these kids using their imagination to solve major problems. We know the intellect is huge, and that's a big issue with them. But I think the emotional one we talked a lot about is really where we see the difference. They feel things so very, very deeply, and the need of connection to others and things is so important and so intense, and allowing them to have that, or at least learning how to regulate that emotion.
Mm-hmm. Well, IEA has many wonderful programs for gifted children and teens and their families. And so I really want to talk about these, because I'm sure that parents out there are just dying for some resources. So we're going to put these up on the screen, and Betsy, maybe you could walk through and talk about the different kinds of options and programs that IEA has.
So all of our programs really focus, again, on the whole child and the complexity of learning, and helping children understand who they are and advocate for themselves while they're in a safe learning environment. So the Academy is a local program in Southern California where we serve students ages really 4 up to 13, 14. And now it's turned into a virtual program. So we're national in scope. We'll always now have a national virtual program as well as this in-person option for young people. And it's mostly enrichment. We have a very in-depth learning lab and science lab. So it's interesting for them to be there too. We also run the largest scholarship program in the country for merit-based, and strictly merit-based. 7th grade scholars apply to us, and if they receive the award, they receive a 4-year scholarship to the school that most appropriately meets their individual learning needs. We don't work with any one school. Every child is evaluated for themselves, and we match them with that appropriate environment. And we identify about 20 to 30 of those students a year, and they become great advocates for us, and now are mentors to some of our students in Academy. Labs are our newest programs, and it's kind of a one-off. So students that are very busy and don't have a lot of time, they sign up for 1 or 2 of these opportunities during a weekend or during the week, and they really get a chance to delve into a content area with a specialist and really learn more about that area. Spyglass is similar, but it's a virtual program that we adopted during COVID, and it's something we'll continue as time goes on. I think that for especially this 2E population, while Academy students, we have a lot of them in that program as well. UNASA and UNASA West are our most unique opportunity to really develop all aspects of self and learn those techniques to calm your mind and to learn to be with others and to really express yourself in using your mind in different ways. And we have experts in the field of gifted education that are our facilitators. So it's really this place that we hold these children so carefully, and they have the opportunity to work 24/7 with these experts and really blossom and grow. It's a magical place to be and wonderful to see. We have resources as well, online database that is interactive. And we do have free parent support groups for educators and teachers once a month that provide opportunities to really delve into topics at a deeper rate, meet other parents and ask questions, and to develop a community. Pretty much what we've learned in the field and as an organization is if we create community, answers come because we learn from each other. And so we try very hard to create a safe learning community for adults and children and teachers as well.
Well, these sound like incredible programs and opportunities. And gosh, I'm so grateful that you started this organization, because I do think this is a very underserved and misunderstood population. So this is great. It's really hard to be different. It's hard to have a child that is different. And so, Betsy, what would you want to say to parents of these amazing but outside the norm children?
I would say that as much of a challenge as they are, enjoy them because they are so witty and funny, and try to keep your sense of humor because that's so important, and be patient. You're not alone. There is a great community out there to support you, and do your best to try to keep records of the amazing things your kids do that you can share with teachers or others as well. And just remember that balance is really important in a child's life. They're more than their intellect. That mind, body, spirit, social, emotional needs are so important, and they learn from you. So model with them, learn with them, grow with them, and love them. We do.
Thank you, Betsy, for the work you're doing for this unique population. Let's check back in one more time with Lauren and our viewers before we wrap up.
Yes, still resonating with a lot of parents. And we have parents of kids kind of all across, different chronological ages. So a wide variety of needs. We have Kathleen here. Many colleges hesitate to admit accelerated students for fear that they would struggle to live or study on campus. What are some characteristics of maturity that could enable a child to succeed on campus?
Well, what we see really is the ability for them to handle coursework on their own, and just that independence. And a little bit of self-regulation. Are they able to get to class on time? And those kinds of skills are most important. I would start early on with this population of making sure that they do have some of that independence before they go to school. And what we see is colleges and even in schools, once they accept a child that's younger because they have been accelerated and they see the success of this, what this child is able to do, they'll do it again.
Great advice. And so now we have Angela, who has an 8-year-old that is extremely creative. Last year he was in school, but this year he was homeschooled. Last year he was behind. And this year during homeschool, he's above grade level. We hear that a lot. He wants to focus on the creative and fights the core academics. Is there any way to make him more excited about those academics by still allowing the creativity? If it's creative, he could work for hours. If it's academic, it's like pulling teeth, even though he is more than capable. Any suggestions?
I'll try, and Jill, you might have some ideas too. It's working with the school, and we see a lot of this now, going back into a school situation where a child's been allowed to soar at home and do what they want to do and learn in so many different ways. But I think teachers are also seeing this as they come back and looking at creative ways to solve a problem. So maybe looking at doing math in a different way, of being able to demonstrate mastery in a different way, to use creative terms, project-based learning.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's what I was thinking about too. I mean, it's just sitting and doing what they would look at as busy work, very, very repetitive, is they're just not going to thrive there. But if they can work in project-based kinds of things and have different ways to present, what they know, they'll really thrive there. And I know that is, it takes some creativity on the part of the teacher too, but that's most likely not the only child in that class that would really benefit from that. I mean, I think all students benefit from some variety and creativity and alternative ways.
Right. And kind of in that same vein, Jennifer is saying she has her son was admitted to a middle school program for visual arts, but we're hesitant to accept because we fear it will be a disaster because he won't be able to keep up with the assignments. He loves art, but his motor speed and possible dysgraphia make him extremely slow. We don't know what to do.
Again, will the school allow accommodations? Because there are many tools to help with that, as far as computer tools or different ways to help with the motor and dysgraphia. If he doesn't have to write those assignments himself, but he could record them or work with a computer or an aid. Some schools offer that, some don't. I don't know if you have any other suggestions.
I mean, go ahead.
Go ahead, Lauren.
Well, I will say that this is the population that we tend to serve. I mean, that for whatever reason, they're being limited on their choices or their opportunities, that they have this brilliance and they're not able to showcase it to the world, or they have to limit their opportunities because an underlying skill is getting in the way. And that's really where we work. We would work, I mean, the advice I would say is to really work on that motor speed, that dysgraphia. Those things can be corrected. So it doesn't have to continue to plague a child, or you don't have to constantly get accommodations or have special, technology or things like that in order for him to thrive. That's what we hate to see kids do, is to be held back because they have a challenge in one particular area and then their brilliance can't be showcased.
And so what you want to do is look at those accommodations as a short-term thing, because you want him to be able to be in an environment where he's, if he needs to be in a more advanced placement, you want him to be able to do that. And so he may have to have some accommodations. And we kind of look at the best of both worlds is, yes, get some accommodations right now while you are correcting the underlying issues so that you don't have to depend on those forever.
That's great.
And Jesse is asking just more about IEA's programs. Does IEA offer any online workshops for kiddos?
Yes, right now, almost all of our programs are virtual by the nature of the world now, but we are going to keep that as a major component of our offerings. So you can check the website. We have many of those different options as well moving forward.
And that's available to kids and parents across the country. It's not limited to Southern California.
Correct. Now.
Great. Yeah. Well, thank you. This was, again, you can see how popular this discussion, this topic is, because it does impact a lot of our parents and families, even more so right now with the COVID times. So parents, if you need additional resources and want to feel connected, we also have a resource for you. Our Mom Squad is our private Facebook group. You can request to join by answering a few questions. We try to keep it limited to parents of kids and teens with learning and attention challenges. But I try to post a lot of resources, answer questions in that group. You can find it on our Facebook page or by searching Facebook groups, search the term SLC Mom Squad to request to join. And last week, we had our peace meeting. Our March peace meeting was last week. I loved meeting a lot of you. We talked about core learning skills and retained reflexes. And this month, our peace meeting will be on Thursday, April 15th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. And we're going to be talking about attention and memory, which is a topic that does impact this twice exceptional population. So I encourage you to join us. I love meeting you and sharing stories and supporting each other. You do need to register to join the meeting. So go to stowellcenter.com/peace to get the registration link. Thank you, parents, and thank you, Betsy, for answering these questions of our parents. You can tell definitely there is a need out there. So thank you for the wonderful work that you're doing. And thanks to all the parents that participated.
Thank you, Lauren. And yes, thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Betsy, for sharing your insights into gifted and talented children and teens, and for the incredible resource that you have provided. And, you know, I think one of those silver linings from COVID is that you now are nationwide, and clearly there is a huge need there. So here is the contact information for IEA. Be sure and check out their website for information, programs, and services to support your gifted children and your family. This is LD Expert Live, your place for answers and solutions for learning disabilities, dyslexia, and auditory and attention challenges. We're live every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific. Next Tuesday, I will be doing a special LD Expert webinar called You've Got This, Practical Tools for Managing Work, School, and Stress in the Pandemic. I look forward to seeing you next Tuesday at 10. Stowell Learning Centers are open for remote sessions and screenings. We're also seeing students on site with all of the COVID precautions. We work with children and adults, helping them permanently change their learning or attention challenges by addressing the underlying lagging skills at the root of the problem so that students can reach their potential and thrive in school. If you would like a free consultation for yourself or your child, give us a call or visit our website at stowellcenter.com. Thank you again, Betsy, and thank you to all of you who have been sharing, subscribing, and joining us each week, either live or on the replay. We appreciate you. And we'll see you next week for our special LD Expert webinar.